word Trinity is not in the Bible. Many skeptics of Trinitarianism point to this to assert that the doctrine of the Trinity is unbiblical. This assertion misses the forest for the trees. The measure of a doctrine's biblical accuracy is in whether or not it accurately represents what the Bible teaches. There are many doctrines held by Christians and other religious groups that use external language to convey what their respective scriptures are teaching. A good example of this is the Islamic doctrine of Tawhid, the oneness of God. Tawhid is considered a fundamental doctrine by Muslims, yet nowhere is Tawhid found in the pages of the Quran. Would it be fair to say then that the doctrine of Tawhid is unquranic? No, it would not, because Islam categorizes a particular set of beliefs that the Quran teaches underneath the term Tawhid. This is an equivocal relationship of the word Trinity to the Bible. Christians believe the Bible teaches that there is one being of God, who is revealed in three co-equal, co-eternal divine persons. This belief is encapsulated in the term Trinity. To simply state that the word Trinity is not found within the Bible is not a reason to reject the doctrine in and of itself. The real question is, does the Bible reveal a triune God? We will unpack this question in detail over the course of this series. For the time being, however, if the term Trinity is not in the Bible, then where does it come from? The linguistic understanding of the Trinity that Christians hold today comes largely from the Cappadocian Fathers, Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, and Gregory of Nazianzus, who lived around the latter half of the 4th century, between the times of the Council of Nicaea and the Council of Constantinople. These three men lived during a time when a belief called Arianism was very popular. With the rise of the Roman Emperor Constantine to power, the Roman Empire no longer considered Christianity an illegal religion. Thus, the many centuries of persecution from the time of the Apostles until then was over. Christians as a whole were now presented with a Roman Empire that was no longer hostile to what they believed, meaning that they had the freedom to gather and converse in a way that they had not previously. However, at this time, controversy over the deity of Christ had been spreading across the faith community. This controversy stemmed from the teachings of Arius. By the time of Constantine's reign, Arius was an elderly man who formerly operated in the bishopric of Alexandria in Egypt. Arius taught that only the Father was truly divine. Jesus, aka the Son or the Word, was a created being, whose essence was not equal to the Father. Arius's doctrine stemmed from his belief that affirming Christ as truly God was to reject monotheism. Arius's teachings did not come from out of nowhere. About 100 years earlier, around the year 200 AD, an earlier controversy had arisen from a movement called monarchianism or Sabellianism, after the teachings of a man named Sabellius. Whereas Trinitarian belief asserts that the one God is revealed in three distinct persons, Sabellianism asserted that the one God is only revealed in one single person, and that God's revealing of himself occurred as different persons at different stages of history, as the Father in creation, as the Son in redemption, and as the Spirit in sanctification. This is contrasted to the Trinitarian position that affirms the co-eternal nature of the Father, Son, and Spirit. Sabellianism survives today in its more common name of modalism, as represented by the teachings of such groups as Oneness Pentecostals and the World Mission Society Church of God. It was Sabellianism's lack of distinction between the Father and Son that drove its opposition by later Christian theologians. This reaction to the Sabellian controversy culminated in the extreme of Arius. Arius was correct to assert the distinctiveness of the Father and Son, but he went even further than that, in teaching that this distinction was rooted in the Father's true divinity and the Son's lack thereof. As such, Sabellianism and Arianism represent the two major distortions of Trinitarian teaching. Sabellianism is right in attributing true deity to the Son, but it is wrong in conflating the distinction of the divine persons. Arianism, on the other hand, is correct in its distinction of the persons, but incorrect in carrying their distinction into their ontology, their being, essence, or nature. Arius's doctrine found its primary opponent in Arius's own bishop, conveniently named Alexander of Alexandria. Alexander defended the view that is now confessed as orthodoxy among Christian believers, that the Son is truly divine with the Father, though he is personally distinct from the Father. Alexander moved to depose Arius for heresy, but Arius rallied support around the Eastern Mediterranean in his defense. The lingering memories of the Sabellian controversy made the Arian controversy confusing for many Christian leaders around the Roman world. Some thought that Arius was merely defending the uniqueness of the divine persons, which is what the earlier Orthodox opponents of Sabellianism had rightly done. Why then should he be deposed for heresy? This confusion eventually led to widespread controversy, which found its height during the beginning of the reign of Constantine. Whatever the actual state of Constantine's beliefs aside, the emperor recognized that the Christian community to whom he now made public political allegiance needed to be united in their belief for the stability of the empire during his reign.
Constantine felt that it was his duty as a Christian emperor to restore unity to his empire's divided church. He therefore summoned the first ecumenical council of bishops from all over the Eastern Empire and a few from the West to settle the dispute.
333 bishops attended the Council of Nicaea. These bishops represented three schools of thought. The first were led by Alexander of Alexandria and Hosius of Corduba, which stood for the orthodox teaching that the Son was of the same nature or essence as the Father. The Greek term preferred by this group was homoousios, meaning same substance. A second group was led by Eusebius of Caesarea. The Eusebians affirmed the same position as the Orthodox group of Alexander and Hosius. However, they disagreed with the use of the term homoousios. The reason for this goes back to the earlier Sabellian controversy, in which the Sabellians used homoousios as the word to convey their idea of a single divine person. However, this was a different use than what the Orthodox group was employing. Alexander, Hosius, and the others like them used homoousios in reference to the common nature of the Father, Son, and Spirit, not their distinct personhood. The Council of Nicaea actually provided an opportunity for these Eusebian supporters, some of whom were previously curious about Arius, to clarify what the Orthodox group was teaching. They realized that they were affirming the same thing. They had just been using different terminology to do so. The final group, which was the smallest, were those who arrived as outright supporters of Arius, including Arius himself. Eusebius records the interrogation of Arius by various bishops who attended the Council of Nicaea. The result of this lengthy process of interrogation was that the attending bishops were no longer confused about what Arius was teaching. He was not merely rejecting Sabellianism. He was rejecting the true divine nature of the Son. Of the 333 bishops who attended the Council of Nicaea, only 3 of them, Arius himself and 2 supporters, stood firm on his teaching of the Son as a creature. The remaining 330 bishops rejected this understanding in favor of the Orthodox position that had been proclaimed since the first generation of the Church, that Christ was fully God in the same way as the Father. The product of these efforts was the Nicene Creed, which clarified the Orthodox stance on the Godhead over and apart from the Sabellian and Arian heresies. As a result of the council, Arius and his 2 supporters were sent into exile. In the wake of Nicaea, however, much of the eastern branch of the Church was still not comfortable with the language of homoousios to describe the relationship of the Father and Son. The reason for this goes back to the early Church Father Origen, who held to the subordination of the Son to the Father, which became the mainline understanding of the Godhead in the East. The memories of the Sabellian use of the word homoousios was perceived as a red flag by Origenes when considering the Nicene statement. In contrast, Nicene supporters perceived the Origenes teaching of personal subordination of the Son to the Father as a closet form of Arianism. This, however, was not accurate either, as Origenes believed in the full divine nature of the Son from eternity past with the Father, unlike Arians who taught that the Son was created.
The result of this confusion of language was that the Arians, the truly unorthodox party, were able to set the essentially orthodox Nicenes and Origenists against each other for 50 years of bitter doctrinal controversy.
It was in this context that some political maneuvering allowed for Arius to return from exile, in spite of the Nicene Creed. As far as Constantine had been convinced, Arius was even said to have affirmed the Nicene Creed, and the emperor was happy to restore him upon this supposed affirmation. During this time, Arius's former bishop and opponent, Alexander of Alexandria, dies. His successor in the Alexandrian bishopric was Athanasius. Athanasius was previously a deacon who had been in attendance at the Council of Nicaea. He was a full supporter of the Nicene creedal language of homoousios to describe the one common divine essence of the Father and Son. The stance of Athanasius and others like him made it appear to Constantine's court that they were being recalcitrant, unwilling to accept the inclusion of Arius and his supporters back into orthodoxy. From Constantine's perspective, this appeared as though Nicene supporters were schismatics who risked dividing the church, the very problem Constantine had hoped to solve with the Council of Nicaea. Such accusations were championed by an Arian bishop, Eusebius of Nicaea. The result of his efforts was that Athanasius was exiled on charges of political subterfuge. Constantine died in 336, and his empire was inherited by his two sons, Constans, who ruled the west, and Constantius, who ruled the east. Constans, and the majority of the west, was firmly committed to Nicene orthodoxy. However, Constantius was Arian, and Arianism began to have a political and theological resurgence in the East during his reign. Constans was murdered by a rebel general in the year 350. Constantius avenged his brother and gained control of the West. This unification of the empire under an Arian emperor led to widespread persecution of Nicene supporters. Athanasius would be exiled 4 more times for his opposition to Arianism. This persecution eventually began to fall also on the Origenists in the latter half of the 4th century. Arians recognized that Origenists were committed to the same ideas of the Godhead as the Nicenes, that the Son was truly, essentially God with the Father, uncreated and eternal. This Arian persecution brought clarity to Origenist bishops about what Arianism had really taught, and helped them to remove any lasting ambiguity they felt toward the argument between Arians and Nicenes. Constantius died in 361. His successor was Julian, commonly remembered as Julian the Apostate, who abandoned the Christian faith during his life. Seeking to undermine Christian influence in the empire, Julian allowed for all exiled bishops to return. His hope was that doing so would restore doctrinal chaos among the various Christian parties, and would open the door for a full return of paganism. In fact, this move paved the way for the great unification of the Nicene and Origenist parties under the leadership of the returned Athanasius. Julian died in battle in 363. His successor placed an Arian general, Valens, in charge of the East. Valens headed a renewed Arian persecution of both Nicenes and Origenists. This persecution further galvanized the common cause of both parties to defeat Arianism and to accept each other as fellow Orthodox believers. Valens relented on his efforts, and Athanasius returned from his final exile in 366. He lived out the remainder of his life in Alexandria, occupying his home diocese until his death in 373. He had become something of a folk hero among Orthodox populations, one which stood over and apart from every Arian figurehead that had attempted to stamp him and the rest of Orthodox believers out. Athanasius's cause would be picked up primarily by the Cappadocian Fathers, Basil the Great, Gregory of Nyssa, and Gregory of Nazianzus. Seeking to bring final reconciliation to any concerns the Nicenes and Origenists had towards one another, they would give the most detailed expression of what Trinitarianism affirms, that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are 3 co-equal, co-eternal divine persons, with one common being, substance, or nature, that being of God.
To get rid of this divisive confusion, the Cappadocians made 2 proposals. One, the word ousia should from now on refer specifically to the one divine nature or essence, as the Nicenes said. But 2, the word hypostasis should refer specifically to the two distinct persons of Father and Son, as the Origenists said.
In parallel to the discussion of the relationship of Father and Son within the Godhead, also began to arise a discussion about the Holy Spirit's place in the Godhead alongside them. A subset of people who had been opposed to Arianism and affirmed the deity of the Son nonetheless denied the deity of the Spirit. These people were referred to as pneumatomachieans, or, more colloquially, Macedonians, after one of their leaders, Macedonius, a bishop from Constantinople. A weakness of the original Nicene Creed was that it did not clarify the Orthodox position on the Holy Spirit. Athanasius had previously argued in favor of the full and true deity of the Spirit with the Father and Son. The Cappadocian Fathers carried this defense of the Spirit forward against the challenge of the Macedonians. In the same way that the Father and Son were being described as having a common ousia with distinct hypostasis, the Holy Spirit was also recognized with these same categories. The Holy Spirit is fully divine, and He is wholly personal. This language of one ousia in three hypostasis comes down to us in English as one being in three persons. It was this understanding of the Godhead that was creedalized at the Council of Constantinople in 381. This form of the Nicene Creed, dubbed the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed, is what is commonly recited the world over by Christians of all stripes. From this point on, Arianism was no longer recognized as an orthodox theology. Those who propounded such teachings would no longer have ties to the universal church. Arianism would live on in the West among Germanic tribes. Today, Arian beliefs are still preserved among groups such as Unitarians, Muslims, and Jehovah's Witnesses, who do not ascribe full and complete deity to either the Son or the Spirit. For everything that we've discussed in how the term Trinity and its definition of one being in three persons came to be, there is a bigger question that we must answer. Is the doctrine of the Trinity an accurate reflection of what the Bible teaches about the Father, Son, and Spirit? In the next chapter, we will begin our examination of the Scriptures.